Hi, welcome to another Kintsugi Conversations. I'm Rob Balfour.
And I'm Niamh Oct, and we are joined tonight by Liv Dennington, who I met through Sasha, which is a society that I co-founded at Leeds University. A bit of a background into Sasha, if people don't know, is kind of a political and campaigning society with welfare mixed in, and Sasha stands for Students Against Sexual Harassment and Assault. So me and my friends set up the society kind of with the hopes of being able to challenge the university on how they support students and kind of Sasha becoming a place where students can find like-minded people, campaign for change, and also that kind of support within the university, or peer support essentially for survivors. And then Liv joined us, and she was a member of Sasha and on the committee for 2 years during her university time. And in the most recent year, she was president. So I will let Liv introduce herself and talk about kind of what the 2 years at Sasha were like, and then we'll kind of go on into a conversation about what it's like to be part of one of those societies and just kind of that university experience as an activist. So I'll hand over to you, Liv.
Yeah, so I'm Liv, obviously. And yeah, I was president for the last year of Sasha, so I became president literally this time last year, and then graduated in July this year. Very much missing it. um, but yeah, like Niamh said, it started out sort of a political and campaigning society, and then I think this year we put much more of a welfare focus on it in order to try and stop rape culture on university campuses and also in wider communities. We worked with a lot more universities across the UK, a lot more charities across Leeds, and we made sure that our communication with the university was pretty strong as well. Because we felt that that was kind of at the core of why Niamh and Chloe founded Sasha. All of the issues that arise when you are a student at university, they can be sort of worsened, I guess, when you're having such new experiences as a young person. And then if you were to have, such a terrible experience as this, to have a society that then supports you is really important if the university is not stepping up. So, as much as it is sort of, we always felt like we shouldn't have to exist, but we were very grateful that we did exist because it also provided a lot of opportunity for those who were within Sasha and working with Sasha as well to sort of do healing journeys of their own as well, I think. I don't know if you felt that way, Niamh.
Yeah, I do think that kind of because it was kind of set up by survivors. I mean, I'm not a survivor, but kind of it was, we saw the issue that there was, and we knew people that were kind of struggling with the issues. So it felt very kind of like close to home. And I think it's just like fed up of like the university not doing what it should be doing in terms of kind of safeguarding the students that they bring to the city essentially. The reason that we kind of transitioned into a university society, because me and Chloe were actually kind of representatives for another organisation, was because that was very focused on like street harassment. And essentially when we tried to speak to the university, they were just like, well, if it doesn't happen on campus, it's not really our problem. And I think even in the time, I mean, it's been like 3 years, the universities has a much more obvious kind of stance on how they support students. And I mean, they've got the harassment and misconduct team now, which I know that you guys worked quite closely with in the year that you were president, especially because they had only just started, really. They'd only just been formed. So I know that you guys kind of almost helped them to like develop how the university was working to like with the issue. What did that feel like kind of as a society? Because obviously I have my perspective, but because you work so closely with them, did you kind of feel like, oh, we're kind of doing your job and kind of like what was their response to Sasha? Because I think they were quite receptive, but if you tell me a bit more about what that was like.
Yeah, so I think obviously I said before, like I always felt like the society shouldn't have to exist in the first place. It's quite a short-term role that's very intense and emotional, and obviously for some of us very personal. But in terms of working with university, I think it really depends on which university you work with, because we've also developed connections with a couple of them, other ones in the north, and I've heard very varied accounts. For myself personally, I do feel like it was down to the individuals. There were a few individuals and teams at the university that you could tell really genuinely cared, and their job wasn't just a job, it was purposeful and meaningful, and they tried to bring all of our ideas to the forefront of university policy. But a lot of the time they were also limited in what they could do, and that was really sad to see. It's kind of, it might seem obvious to us because we work in this sort of like sphere anyway, but it's kind of the further up you go in terms of hierarchy, pay, whatever it is, the less people seem to care. And I definitely really saw that in speaking to university officials. I think maybe Niamh, you caught the tail end of that as well. Just before you left, Sasha, we were having meetings with university management, and I do think that they often don't feel very responsible for this kind of thing, but actually it is their responsibility, and it should be their responsibility, because it shouldn't be down to students to support other students at the end of the day. And I do think, like I say, it unlocked a lot of pathways for a lot of the people who did work in the society and still do. And it's growing every day, and that's great to see. But I just think with the complexities of university, it's much more beneficial that we've adapted this to this welfare mindset, I guess, in terms of almost not ditching the activist side and the protest side, but I think that the university resonated a lot more with the well-being side of things, just because the protest was so controversial at times. Make of that what you will.
Yeah, I do think that the protests caused bad conflict in that like the university didn't really like take it on board. Whereas when you take like the welfare perspective, it's a bit harder to ignore, because it's not like a day where you put the chalk all over the uni or anything. And then they just get outraged that there's offensive things written everywhere, when it's like, well, that's the point. But then, yeah, when you're bringing in student welfare, then they kind of have to sit up and listen, because ultimately, if they ignore that, that becomes like a big issue. And I think it's nice to hear that the teams, the people that work in the teams, are like really passionate. And I think from what I know, some of them also come from kind of like similar contexts, like they've worked in this sector and then have kind of transitioned in, like seen the opportunity at the university and thought, this is great, like I can make the change. But I'm not surprised to hear that that's kind of almost, in the nicest way possible, like a tick boxing exercise, where they're like, well, we have this team of people that are supposed to like combat this issue. However, it's still not changing like the way that the university as a whole approaches everything, and it's not having that much of an impact. It's almost a kind of redirect of like, if someone then complains, it's like, well, we have this team, so just go speak to them and do that. So it's not really surprising. But
yeah, I did find at certain points of the year it really picked up, like freshers. They were really good. Both freshers, that is, like September and January.
Yeah.
But I do also feel like, especially towards the end, we were starting to compromise with university, even the good teams of university, because they were having to compromise with budget management, all these factors that you don't see as a student necessarily. And so a lot of that like activist work sort of got drowned out. But now I feel like Lauren, who's now president, is really bringing that back, and we definitely saw that last week at the relaunch. So
yeah,
I'm hopeful that that's kind of the direction it's going to go in, and I know that she's taking more of like a creative stance as well, which I think is really good for the well-being side of things.
It's a really interesting kind of experience when you've been such a kind of integral part of a society. I mean, in the role of president, you're literally running everything and kind of like delegating and making sure that everything is going smoothly and achieving the things that the society wants to achieve. But it's like a very strange, and I can speak from my perspective as well, as like Sasha is something me and Chloe started together, and it's like already grown into like you kind of have to pass the baton and be like, well, okay, yeah, whatever happens is like, I mean, we have absolute faith in the people that are on committees, you know what I mean, to just keep it going. And I mean, the year that you were present last year, Sasha was just unbelievably successful. Like, it's so exciting to watch. And I think there's like the positive of the fact that it does change hands so often, it keeps it fresh. You've got people coming in, bringing in new perspectives all the time. So it really kind of like keeps the society thriving, I think. But I think it's really hard to kind of let go of it. And I mean, you're like, what, maybe 3 months out of kind of properly letting go of the responsibility now. So how's that been?
Yeah, you're right. It's very bittersweet, and I feel like the work is never finished. Like, it's always in my head. I pretty much only just logged out of the email and the calendar like last week. so it's kind of like releasing it only now that it's sort of having that rebrand and the new president is taking over. But I have full trust in the whole new team, and like I say, it's expanding, and every year people come with more and more ideas of what they want to do, and you know, more and more even complaints for the uni, which, you know, are helpful I guess, like, because we can bring that forwards and be sort of the voice for the change for the rest of the students in the year. And it's obviously a difficult balance between that and appeasing like what the university staff want to do. But I feel like last year we definitely struck a good balance with that, and sadly I do feel like a lot of that was because we won some awards, and I think that getting that recognition was obviously really good in terms of like connections with other societies across the UK, especially back down south where I'm from. But I think that I'm not, yeah, I don't know how to phrase it exactly, but I think that sometimes it can be performative. Sasha worked really hard, but there are so many societies at uni that work really hard as well, especially activist societies. And in terms of winning awards from the university itself, I'm not sure what that kind of significance is there. But yeah, I mean...
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because like you want to kind of acknowledge how hard that everyone's worked, and like ultimately, if Sasha didn't exist and all the work that we've all put in over the years, we know that we've made change in the university, and we know that the work we do is important. But when you get like these awards, it's like, well, why is the university kind of acknowledging it? It's almost like,
yeah, I'd rather they make the change.
Yeah. It's like awards are nice, but it's like, but like, how much have you changed as like the university or union since we started, and or is it kind of a like, oh, we're gonna give them the award because like we want to acknowledge that this is an important thing, rather than being like, oh, actually, yeah, we need to like change. And I think that's also really difficult for students as well, because you want to be on the side of like the union, and you want to work with them and have a positive relationship with them, because you can kind of enact as much change as possible. But at the same time, like, you kind of have to work against them, because you can't just be like, oh yeah, we're really good friends, and like you work with a few staff members that are like really solid and cool, but like ultimately, if they're not doing what you asked, then like what does that actually achieve? It's very difficult. I don't know, is that something that, like, I don't know, Rob, if you want to come in here and kind of speak to kind of your experience, and if you've seen anything that kind of replicates that.
I think it's interesting, a lot of things you've just kind of talked about, really. And going back to universities in the 1980s, which is when I first encountered university, when I first went onto a campus in the early 80s, they were absolutely full of political conversations on every corner of every part of the campus. There used to be depending on the day, there'd be somebody selling Socialist Worker or Militant Tendency or the whatever papers there were, all of these. And you could almost have people kind of almost had uniforms, so you could tell which ones. So, and everyone was talking politics. So whatever they were studying, they were talking politics. And the unions were active places. So it's strange that the people who now run universities actually resist that culture. So it's strange now that you found yourself in an environment where the higher you got up the ladder of the hierarchies of the university, the more they just seem to be completely disassociated from the welfare of the people who, in effect, bring them their salaries. So the way I look at it is very much as I kind of come from a union kind of perspective about it, is that, basically you are paying to be there. So you have, your students, they have a duty of care to you. And whatever you bring to the university, this idea, because I've heard it from some university well-being people, is, we can deal with if you're being harassed on the campus on a Monday afternoon whilst you're on term, we'll deal with that. If you've come to campus and you've been harassed in whatever form, and that's triggered something from your childhood because you were abused in your childhood, whatever abuse that was, then that's not our issue because we don't deal with that. We'll deal with that issue that arrived on that afternoon. But anything that's triggered is nothing to do with that. And we'll give 6 sessions of counselling to the person who's being harassed in whatever form, but we won't deal with the issue that's now being opened up. And I think that's immoral. I think it's immoral. And I think that universities take you in to not just produce widgets with pieces of paper at the end of it, but to shape human beings who are critically able to assess and analyse the world in which they're going to engage, whatever your degree subject was. And they have a duty of care to you to protect you, firstly, on the campus, to give you as much knowledge and information and to advocate to the authorities outside of the campus boundary to make it safe for you as much as possible, because the university has that duty. It's not your duty to do it. It's the university's duty to make sure that their clients, if you like, because if they want to see themselves as businesses, you are their clients. And they have a duty to give as much advocacy for your safety in the city centre of Leeds as they do in the Students' Union on the campus. And if something is done to you, in whatever form that is, they have a duty to deal with that. And if that brings up things from your past, then actually you're part of the community of that university and they should deal with that. I think they need to invest in the services. I think that's what Sasha is really about, is making sure that actually you improve. And that's why I liked Sasha when first encountered you. It kind of makes a university tense about all this stuff. Actually, that's what universities are about, is people kind of using their intelligence to change things. But they don't do that.
I think the greatest irony about the whole chalking situation was that when we went to do it for round 2, so we did it and they washed it all away and they were like, you need to get permission and blah, 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 blah. And then we did it a second time and they were like, you need to be with the chalk all the time in case anyone gets offended and needs support. And I was like, for a university that literally offers no support, but like we put things that actually happen to real people. So like the stuff that they should be dealing with, because these are the experiences that people have had, that they're not offering like support for. But then when we kind of highlight that these are things that happened, just in case anyone got upset about that, we had to be there as support and to kind of explain as to why these offensive things were written everywhere. And yeah, I just find that highly ironic, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think it almost falls into that like restrictive victim blaming category of things, where it's like the university has no trust in students and no idea of their like safety, and like Rob was saying, their stance on duty of care and everything is just so backwards no matter what university you go to these days. They need to really find a balance with that and independence, I think, of students. But instead they're preventing societies that want to make meaningful change from reaching out to other students and from creating these protests that raise awareness. We have the right to protest, just as we should have the right to live our lives free of harm when we go to university for 3 or 4 years. It's such an intense period of our lives, and it's quite frustrating as a young person to just have that knocked down time and time again. Like, even when you go through all the red tape the university sets for you as a society, as a student, whatever it is, you still get knocked down, you still get like criticized, and it's just, yeah, it's interesting.
I mean, I think they could maybe even have to. I mean, there is a lot of economic issues for universities because they've built all these buildings over the last 20 years, where they've spent fortunes on buildings. I mean, they've rebuilt lots of campuses, there was some degree of maintenance needed on buildings. But I would argue that actually universities are not buildings. Universities are their students and their staff. who teach or lecture you or guide you to be critically. We've forgotten that universities are about creating minds, about shaping minds to be free to shape themselves, which is what critical thinking really is, isn't it? About shaping your mind so you can shape what you think without and understand how you analyze what other people are trying to shape within your thinking. So that's not buildings. That's not kind of having events and cutting ribbons and taking photographs and kind of looking really cool. No, that's about making sure your student community is well educated, has access to lots of different perspectives within the faculty, and kind of can judge and check, but also that they're safe, they feel well, they're well fed. And I think your personal safety is, key to that, because psychology is what I did. So if you go back to Maslow, who's very kind of misunderstood, but if you go back to Maslow, it is about the first kind of part of a process of a human being requires, which is safety. You need to be safety to grow and develop and to feel able to embrace what universities should be there to offer you. And I think they've forgotten about that. I think it's become limitation, it's become about money. You spend more the money on the buildings than they do on the counselling centres, and they don't want to be caught up in kind of stuff that goes there. And they should be spending more money on the holistic well-being services and less on the buildings, put a marquee up. I don't think students really mind as long as you make them warm. So as long as there's heating there and stuff, and they're getting really exciting lectures and teachers who are really, really engaged, then I don't think he would have been bothered whether it was a marquee or whether it was a posh building with glass, all covered in nice glass. It's kind of what you wanted was the energy of teaching and of being lectured in a way that you could engage with, and protected and made safe, and also be able to change and be an activist and change things. But maybe I'm just an old guy who come through the old times about universities a different age. But maybe it's going back to that, because maybe they'll have to go back to that, because I don't think they can sustain the current model. And they also need to look after their students better.
Yeah, I think it's difficult to say from our perspective, because like working in this sector and doing charity work in this sector, and then also being a young person, like we haven't had very much chance to forget the issues, because we're faced with them every single day, especially whilst we're at uni, and a lot of us have experienced them ourselves. And I don't think that there's like inherently bad people in university management. I don't believe that anyone's inherently evil or anything like that, but I think that the more power that a person has, the easier it becomes to forget the real purpose of university and creativity and all of these things that we kind of now promote at Sasha to combat the negatives. And even just speaking to, I think it was earlier this year, we invited a police officer into our sort of little sip and social bubble, and had a really long conversation with him about what more police can do to make students feel safe, make women feel safe in particular in Leeds. And he had all these ideas about being able to sort of couple up with police officers and walk around Leeds and show them the areas where you feel unsafe. But actually a lot of our feedback was that we don't feel safe with you in the first place. And even down to like their marketing and their media, all their presentations, that doesn't make us feel safe, because there's no communication, there's no relatability. And it's the same with university management. They don't see what we do or what we go through or anything like that on a day-to-day basis. And I'm not criticizing like every single police officer, but the police in general, people fear them, they don't trust them, they're not a pinnacle of safety or anything like that. And this one police officer, he was very good and very receptive to everything we had to say and took it all on board. So I do have high hopes for Leeds, but again, it's one man trying to change an entire system. It's difficult to initiate those conversations even.
So, I mean, what you're illustrating there, Liv, is that individuals can be receptive. And I'm like you, I don't think the human race is made up of evil people. I think what it is made up of, though, is people who climb systems, who kind of get invested in the systems at all levels. So most people are bystanders to systems dysfunction and the failure to change, because change brings risk. So if you're at the top, it brings risk, then you might be shown not to be good enough to actually be part of the change. There's a lot of truth in the kind of idea that people rise to levels of middle management and other management, not because they're very good at it, but actually they're just very good at kind of being raised up to different levels. So there's a lot of arguments about it, a lot of evidence about that. And we've created systems that are risk averse. We've just been talking to somebody recently who was talking about change in Leeds generally, about trauma and reformed. And it is about risk aversion. That's why they're terrified of the issue of abuse in any form. That's why they kind of, don't trigger anybody with your protests with chalk the university, because we don't want anyone triggered, and if you're going to put it up there, you'll have to stand there and be responsible for anything that happens. Having someone acknowledge and validate your experience of interpersonal violence is not a triggering situation. It's a releasing situation. There's a difference. So the triggering situation is when someone disinvalidates you, when you're re-traumatized by somebody's response. That's the damaging thing. The actual trigger, as they describe it, is the release of validation. So that requires you to be validating. It doesn't require you to shut it down. It kind of says it's okay. We're here, we understand, and we hear, and we get it. We see you. That's powerful. And if you look at the research, especially in GPs, which is a very interesting space, when GPs have adopted proactive kind of questioning of people about their abuse history, especially sexual abuse histories, the complaints haven't flooded in saying, oh, don't ask me that, why did you ask me that? It's actually the reverse. People have complained, why did it take you so long to ask? And it's the people in our systems at the top, in the universities elsewhere, in my view, are the ones who are blocking the change for reasons that are best known to themselves sometimes. And because they want to control it, they're scared of it, it's going to overwhelm their people. And actually opening the doors and letting the light in, pulling up the blinds, actually is validating for people. And then, it's kind of just being human with people. That isn't anything special. And I think that's what universities are terrified of. I think they're terrified of being flooded with everybody's childhood experiences. It's going to get in the way of the system. They're going to have to spend more money on counsellors and all this kind of thing. They're going to have to do that, and they want to spend it on other things. And it's not their problem. And I think, the reality is they're going to have to do it because society is changing. What we're seeing, I don't know what you're seeing at Leeds last year, but what we see now is increasing numbers of young people disclosing. And that's being seen across all services in this sector. And that's never been seen before. So it's always been later disclosure. Now it's earlier and earlier and earlier. And that, to me, tells me there's a massive cultural shift is coming.
I do think that it's duty of care for universities is kind of an interesting debate, because we spoke to someone in another episode who's a therapist at Leeds Beckett, and he kind of had the viewpoint that, while universities should be supportive, ultimately it is the point of kind of welfare and support from a university perspective is getting that person through their degree so that they can go on and kind of live and exist and get through their degree. But I just think that from my personal perspective, universities do need to be doing more in terms of that welfare, because ultimately, I mean, you've both kind of touched on this, but students are paying to go to university. So we're literally paying for a service. All of those loans and all of those fees go into running that university. And I do think that more of that money does need to be going towards student welfare. And especially working with first years, because essentially these people have moved to a city that they probably don't know. They've maybe been to once before on an open day, and for the purpose of attending that university. So if you're literally making someone relocate their life, there should be support on offer to them, and that support should be very, very clear. Not something that you have to find on a really discreet university webpage and that takes you half an hour to actually find the support that you need. And I also think that something that you touched on earlier, Rob, is people actually coming to university that have had experience of CSA. Universities should know how to support students that have had those experiences, because ultimately that is going to have an impact on their university experience, because it is something awful that they've experienced in their life. So I think if universities are just going to just ignore, just see students as students, and it's you're just here to be a student and nothing else. I think students put so much into kind of attending specific universities, and that support should be in place for them. And I also think if the university can't support. I mean, CSA, as we know, can be very complex, and maybe university counselling places aren't the best kind of resourced places to deal with that, but it's about making sure that you've got those connections within the community to then refer those students and check in with them and see, well, how is it going at this place? Say someone got referred to us, like how, and making sure that they're kind of supporting that student and making them feel like a human being, not just a student at the university. And like, it's funny, the kind of police officers' approach of like, oh, well, you could just show us where you feel unsafe. And it's like, I mean, I think if you spoke to anyone, they would know where students don't feel safe in Leeds. So it's like, what are you going to do? Like, you already know. Why are you just asking the same things over and over again?
The police will know where you're unsafe because they'll know where that's where the reports of the crimes that are committed against you occur. So, it's not for you, is it, to kind of say, well, these places are unsafe and walk down this street and point out that corner. Because in the end, even if you do that, what are they actually going to do? What needs to happen is there needs to be more resources and better training of police, and those city centres need to be made safer. And that really is down to the amount of police you actually have on the streets, and they should be engaging in a way that is actually really improving the situation. The worst thing that can happen to a police officer is a child running up to them and then a police officer saying hello to a child and the child hiding behind their parent because it's a police officer. That is not a good society you want. You want a society where a child feels safe to go to the police officer, where a young woman feels safe to go to a police officer, a young male feels safe to go to a police officer. They have a duty to protect us and do the law, and sometimes that means you have to arrest people. But reality is they are there to protect us. They're not there to suppress us and to manage us. It's what's going to change things is better resourcing of police officers, better training, better selection of police officers. Pay them more money. If you need to pay them more money, pay them more money so you get better police officers, whatever it is, because it protects us all, and makes sure you are safe. And that's what worries me about universities. They kind of wash their hands of their duty, really. How many people go to Leeds University? For £200,000, £300,000, £500,000 a year, you could set up a specialist service in the university that could deal with every disclosure, every form of sexual abuse, whatever student brought. They could get up to 6 months of counselling, maybe even more if they wanted over the 3 years. And it would probably cost about £500,000 a year to do it. That is not a lot of money for universities. These universities have massive budgets. You know how much Leeds University's budget is, but it was hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds. So 500,000 quid is probably, a percentage of the marketing budget of the university. So if you could increase and add to whatever exists, do a specialist stuff, and I think that would help. That would be my view of it. So I think it's not hard to change these things. It's making decisions about where you put resources and making sure that people are accountable for the way they engage and deal with their roles, really. Because people are paid to do these things. We're all paid to do our job in the end, and you should do your job.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, a lot of people are trapped in that system, and probably one of my biggest fears now I'm no longer a student is getting trapped in that system. I think that universities, governments, police, whatever it is, all these organisations, a lot of them work as strictly businesses, it seems, especially at Leeds. It felt a lot like in management it was just business, and that prioritization of money and politics over student welfare, that doesn't sit right with me. That reflects a huge wider social issue. I think because we originally meant to record this around June, or that was when we first spoke, I remember taking notes about rape crisis, asking the political parties to speak out in their manifestos about sexual violence. I'm not sure what came of that, if any parties even did. Obviously, we now have a different government, so it will be interesting, and it has been interesting to see the sort of slight changes that have been made, but still there's just this wider neglect of that duty of care for everyone, not just students, but everyone.
I think there is going to be major change. I think the issue is they're not really sure what that change is. There's definitely, Labour has a policy about halving interpersonal violence, including sexual violence, within 2 parliaments. That's a massive climb. And you're not going to be able to do that with no extra resources. You can change things. There's always room for kind of improving the way things are delivered. And change is very difficult. But we had 14 years of a government or a series of governments that tried to force change through austerity. All these would make things worse. So there needs to be transformation. There's no doubt about that. Some things are broken. Some people argue policing is broken in many ways. The NHS is broken, and it needs to have reform, whatever that means. So next year, I think, is when you'll start to see transformation, because they haven't got along. 10 years is not a long time to halve interpersonal violence in all its forms. It is not long. That's a big target. It's right to do it. Some people say you should make it 100% the target, but half is better than no half at all. But it's going to take massive resources, but it's also going to need the people that you've just identified, that you've met in senior positions that make decisions about strategy and policy, regardless of where the funding, even if they've given the funding to do it, they change their mindset. They don't change their mindset, nothing changes. That's why I like what you would. When I saw your I like activism. I'm sure you've kind of guessed that I like the activism thing. But what I saw about you was that you saw it as you could do something. You didn't have to wait for them to do it. That you were going to go out there and kind of try to change things yourself, even if it was just a little thing. So when you started in Niamh with Chloe, you didn't sit there thinking you were going to change the whole planet. You were going to kind of just change one part of something in Leeds, the university. And that's where activism is, starting by changing things, changing people. So, everybody needs to change things and be accountable. And you don't have to feel those pressures, that you should be able to sit and put your hand up and say, this is wrong, we're not doing this right. How do we do this better? And people should turn around and say, yeah, okay, let's have a look at that. Your future is only changed by a change in all of this. That's my view of it. It all needs to change. I don't mean revolution, but you need to have none of this stuff. No more endless inquiries. Crime should be reduced that's committed against you. And that requires political will, resources, and change in culture in people who have power. And that's the only way it will happen.
I think that's the thing as well. It's like you look to any kind of system or just everywhere that the resistance is coming from, it's the same thing. I mean, we've said in multiple of these podcast episodes, it's about accountability and these places being kind of terrified to actually just say, yeah, actually, we've made a mistake. It's like if they decide, oh, yeah, we do need to change, they're admitting that they've done it wrong. And that's just like replicated everywhere. I think that's what's really frustrating.
I've been thinking about it for a long, long time. Why the resistance? And I think a lot of it now is, personally, what I think it's about is what Niamh has just kind of articulated. And it's moral injury, or the fear of moral injury. That if we admit as an institution, as a system, that we have been harming people for, in my view, 200 years in relation to the medical models, pathologization of human trauma. So I think it's conscious or unconscious resistance to change. It's the same in universities, as Niamh has just said. If they switch and change, they're going to have to put their hands up and say, we've been kind of ignoring and looking the other way of this for decades. Who knows what harm we've done? How many people have kind of been hurt that we could have helped, and we kind of look the other way. And they also, their clinical kind of managerial minds will be, how much is this going to cost us if they sue us if we do it? If you want to be really cynical about it, I think there's some of that goes on as well, is if we kind of put our hands up and start saying, do we get sued by all the people that we've let down in the past because they're going to come after us for failure of look after care and stuff. And so I think society needs to have a big conversation about not suing each other, because, unless you really have been really seriously injured by it, and that's a very difficult situation, it's some form of restorative kind of process. So we can shift, because if we don't shift, it's going to be a crisis where those lawyers are coming, and then whole systems will collapse with lawyers when they start. You're seeing it now with the resistance to the compensation claims, even for the postmasters. After all the kind of emotional stuff that came out of the Christmas kind of New Year docudrama, and everybody was like, oh, this is awful and all the rest. And You listen to the postmasters now, and they'll tell you that they're still fighting to get their compensation. So, all of these things are part of the system. But if it isn't solved, then you will have to live in it. So if it doesn't change, you'll have to find your way in it. Or you have to be someone like me who kind of navigates on the edges of it, kind of as being what you call maybe a cultural nomad. So I can kind of wander around the desert as a lone kind of traveller and then kind of do wherever I can with bits. But if you want to have a family, if you want to have a home, if you want to have a career and a pension, the system traps you in that way of thinking. I think that creates a lot of mental distress, which is why there's millions of people on long-term sick at the moment. I think a lot of it's to do with that. So I think it's a lot about the system collapsing.
Yeah, I agree. Is there anything that you'd like to throw in, Liv? Is there anything we haven't covered that you wanted to bring up?
Just to maybe close off, I think being a disruptor and advocating for change isn't easy. I never found the job of Sasha easy. I'm sure you didn't either, for many different reasons. But it is also very rewarding, and I do feel like when you make those little changes, and a lot of them were very immediate for us, but then some of them were smaller and sort of more integrated with the university policy. A lot of the time you see eventually that it pays off and that eventually it all does just fall into place. But that requires keeping on working on it and keeping on chipping away at the system and at, every negative that comes about. We need societies like Sasha and charities like Survivors West Yorkshire and like Rape Crisis to chip away at it.
Yeah.
And that eventually, creates a slightly better world, hopefully.
Yeah, I think that, as hard as this can be sometimes, you kind of just have to focus on the little positives, like you said. And I think Sasha especially, every single person that was on Sasha committee contributed such wonderful things from the very start, and you kind of meet in a community of people that are just truly wonderful, and when you're all there and you're working towards the same thing, it's so empowering. And like when you kind of have conversations like this, you start to go like, oh my god, there's so much more to do. But just like you said, I think it's just so important to focus on those little things and the little wins, and hopefully, I mean, Sasha will always be there, even if there's improvements, it's never going to be perfect. And I think even if we got to a point where the university was kind of taking accountability and it was really good support for students, Sasha would still have a place in that peer support and just kind of keeping it going. But it's hard, but there are so many positives to it, definitely. Yeah.
So if I could add a little positive, because sometimes it sounds like I'm telling you it's doom and gloom in the system, whatever. 25 years ago, there was nothing for survivors, particularly, that you would recognise now. So it's a very different landscape. And in the end, I've just written an article, or I've written a chapter for a book, and the basic title is Tell Fear No, the Hope is You. And the hope is you. It's your generation's going to have to change it all in the future. And you don't have to, I don't think you have to have people like me can be out there kind of out doing the kind of front thing. You can be a disruptor within systems. You just have to be smart about it. So you have to understand the system and how it works. And then you can do micro disruptions. Then you can kind of manipulate the system. So I've worked in systems. I sound as if I've never worked in them, but I have worked in them. And what I did was you knew sometimes you couldn't influence the bigger policy thing, but what you could change is an individual response to somebody. So you could just add in something just that kind of made it slightly different for that person. And sometimes change is about one person at a time. It doesn't have to be placards and revolution. It can just be very smart disruption, and you can make differences to individuals doing that, and then work towards the big policy changes and the big cultural changes. So, I think that is kind of the hope is you.
No, I think that's a good place to end. It's a nice positive, I like that, the hope is you. Nice. Thank you for joining us, Liv. It's been really nice to chat. And thank you as well from co-founder of Sasha to amazing president. You really did, Sasha just went, it was just crazy to see where what happened and where it went last year. Like it was so successful and it's so exciting, and I'm so proud of everyone that's involved. It's so lovely to see it. So thank you for that as well. And I hope that we'll all still be part of Sasha. We've all made our mark and we're all still a little community. But yeah, thank you for coming on, and thank you, Rob, as well. It's been a good chat.
It's been a privilege to speak to you too, because I really think you are the real definition of activists. Because you kind of did it when you came to university, and there's a lot of reason why you wouldn't want to do something, and you got out there and kind of made a difference. That's activism. So you are truly the definition of an activist. That's something you should be proud of for the rest of your life. So wherever Sasha becomes or wherever you should be proud, that when you could have just got on with putting your head down and got the piece of paper, you think, well, now I'm going to do something to change things as well. That's cool.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks to everyone who might listen as well. Cool. That's bye from me.
Thank you, and bye from me.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.